Roughly 10 years ago, the world received one of the strangest and most polarizing games of all time, with an open-world horror game called Deadly Premonition. At the time, people didn't quite know what to make of this budget game for the Xbox 360, and reviews ranged from a masterpiece of a game to an outdated game that really made no sort of sense. Because of how all over the place this game was in receiving reviews, it ended up getting a cult following who appreciated the B-movie style experience that the game offered. And since then, the game has been re-released on other platforms for people to enjoy the madness. A sequel for the game, Deadly Premonition 2: A Blessing in Disguise, was announced for the Nintendo Switch during a Nintendo Direct, and people were once again confused by this. Now, as a fan of the original game, I, however, was personally really looking forward to the sequel, but had some reservations about it. Would they be able to capture that same magic that the first game had, or would they try to make it a more AAA-like experience and lose the charm that the original game had? Somehow, someway though, I think they've managed to avoid both of those potential tropes, and instead just made a game that honestly, probably shouldn't have even been released in the state that it's in. What's going on, guys? I'm RGT85. If this is your first time on the channel, be sure to hit that subscribe button. But without any further ado, let's talk about Deadly Premonition 2: A Blessing in Disguise, and why this might be my most disappointing game thus far of 2020. Deadly Premonition 2 basically tells a tale of past and present events, and also links in events from the first game. You once again play as FBI detective Francis York Morgan, and the game starts out in 2019, about 10 years after the events in the first game, which took place in Greenvale. With a broken down old York being interrogated by FBI agents who are trying to connect the events from the Greenvale case and a separate case that took place in 2005 in a small town of LaCar, Louisiana, which is where a majority of the gameplay in the game takes place. York happens to get a tip while on vacation and heads to LaCar to investigate, off the record of course, of a murder case of a girl named Lise Clarkson. Now, the Clarkson family essentially runs this small town of LaCar, Louisiana, and with the help of the local sheriff and his daughter, York sets out to solve the mystery of both this small town, the Clarkson connection to it, the murder itself, and of course the people within this town. Now, the standout point of the game is by far the storytelling and the characters in the game, which in a similar manner to the first game is a weird, eccentric, and diverse cast of characters. I think the bayou-like setting of a small town sort of sheltered off from bigger cities really helps the game out because it's almost somewhat believable at times. From the Clarksons themselves to a spirit oracle named Hoongan, basically Papa Shango if you're a wrestling fan, the game does a great job of making you interested in all of these weird characters and their weird, interesting lives that while looking at the bigger picture of the case you are trying to solve. And then, well, pretty much after that, the game just falls off the rails completely. The original Deadly Premonition was a $20 game when it came out on the Xbox 360, and was just sort of a random horror game that appeared out of nowhere, so people were a bit more accepting towards this budget release. And yes, the game looked like a slightly better PS2 game, the characters were weird, the control was a bit stiff, and it might have not been the best game in the world, but it definitely had a certain charm in terms of storytelling and just an overall B-movie feeling to it. The game wasn't riddled with technical issues or anything like that, it just didn't necessarily feel like a big budget modern game because it really wasn't, and it wasn't necessarily intended to be. Deadly Premonition 2: A Blessing in Disguise, however, is a $50 game that got a lot of fanfare by debuting in a Nintendo Direct and even being promoted by Nintendo, and somehow, someway, this game runs absolutely abysmal at times to the point of where I don't even think they tested some of this game. Now, the main way to traverse the town of LaCar is via your skateboard, which means that, like in the first game, there's a strong emphasis on the open world aspect of it. The problem is, the open world aspect of the game runs so abysmally terrible that it almost makes the game unplayable at times. None of the footage you're being shown is doctored or slowed down or anything like that. This is how the game actually runs when you're out in the open. Now, eventually you do unlock the ability to fast travel within the game, but you still have to go to the area in order to unlock fast travel to it, meaning that you can never really fully avoid the open world aspect of the game. Couple that with the fact that missions require you often to be in the open world aspect of the game, and it's just insane to me that the game was released in this state. Originally, it seemed like there was going to be no patches for the game either, and reviewers said that, oh, well, the frame rate and whatnot was a part of the charm for the game in a so bad it's good way. But then it was revealed that a patch would be coming in to fix some of these performance issues. Now, the original game wasn't a technical marvel or anything like that, but it ran in an acceptable manner that didn't feel super janky or take you out of the experience. Technical issues were never the charm or the focal point of the first game. It was the weird characters, the weird setting, and the weird storytelling. It honestly just annoys the hell out of me that people gave this game a pass on the technical aspects of it, and it almost makes me think they didn't know why the first game was so special in the first place. Beyond the horrible frame rate outdoors, the game has long loading screens that often take over a minute long, sometimes with just a black screen and no indication of what is going on. I actually thought the game crashed on me a few times, but no, it was just loading. Another thing that takes a huge step back from the original game to me in Deadly Premonition 2, A Blessing in Disguise, is definitely the combat in the game. Once again, the first game wasn't the smoothest experience in the world in terms of combat, but it still felt pretty fun and satisfying, and you had a variety of melee weapons at your disposal along with a variety of guns, all of which are absent from this game. The combat has been extremely simplified for some reason, and it really just makes for a very boring experience because, well, you're never really in danger. You can lock onto enemies and shoot a bunch of rubber, yes, rubber bullets at them all at once, and there's literally no sense of danger in the game because everything just feels so easy. Boss battles are an absolute joke, and I actually never died in the game because even if you get into some sort of trouble, enemies commonly drop items that will heal you or give you more bullets. The original game had a way higher sense of fear because the enemies in the boss battles were just way more intense, but this game strips it all away in terms of combat and really just leaves you feeling very empty. You can upgrade things like your skateboard and York's bullet power as well, but honestly, there's just no point in it because the combat is just way too easy and often happens very few and far between. The original game was a great balance of open world stuff, investigating, and combat, while this game definitely has a much more stronger emphasis on the open world stuff, and the combat is almost an afterthought. Beyond the poor performance of the game, the visual style of the game has changed from the original game as well, adopting a more cel-shaded look that's kind of reminiscent of Borderlands games. Honestly, when the game isn't in motion, it looks okay-ish, maybe like an HD Wii game, but there's a lot of quirks beyond that. You have a lot of pop-up, you have a lot of low-res textures that sometimes clean up when you get closer to them, there's a lot of missing animations in the game, and just weird technical bugs that are just all over the place. I will say, however, the game does run a lot better when you're in indoor areas for the most part. It almost feels like a much more playable experience. Now, one area of the game that I will give high regards for is the audio. It has a great mixture of sort of quirky music and voice-acted characters. All of the characters, I think, sound great and really sort of bring you into that deep South Louisiana accent and atmosphere, and the fun writing definitely helps out a lot as well. York is still obsessed with films and often goes into film-related side rants, which are always entertaining. The main issue with Deadly Premonition 2, A Blessing in Disguise, though, is that even beyond the horrid performance of the game, it's just not a fun game like the first game was. Most missions are pretty plain. Some missions have you waiting a long time to access a certain area at a certain date and time, and some missions give you absolutely no clue or sort of direction on where you're supposed to go. There's one mission in particular where you have to find a can of spinach in a vending machine. However, there are lots of vending machines in the town of Lacar, so where do you go? Well, you pretty much just go around all over the place looking at various vending machines, trying to find the one vending machine that actually has the can of spinach in it. It takes forever, and like I said, there's no sort of indication on where you are actually supposed to find this. Spoiler alert, it's at the vending machine below Melvin's house. You're welcome if you decide to play this game. The combat being dumbed down just really gives you no incentive to keep playing the game either, and the fact that there's no sort of cool melee weapons or even guns that you can acquire in the game just really make it feel very hollow. Now, they did add in some mini games like bowling and rock skipping, which can be somewhat enjoyable, but of course those suffer from performance issues as well. And really, it's a shame too, because I think the characters and the story of the game are super interesting, and you want to see how it all comes together at the end, because the writing is very well done. But the problem is, the game itself isn't well done. Like I said, the original Deadly Premonition was weird and really wasn't a great game, but as a $20 random release out of nowhere, it managed to strike a chord with some people who enjoy B-movie horror because of its cast of characters and its decent gameplay. Deadly Premonition 2: A Blessing in Disguise is a $50 game, over twice the price of the original, that while it retains the weird and interesting storytelling, completely drops the ball on the gameplay aspect of the game that made the first game so interesting and made you want to keep playing it and exploring the world that you were in. And this game was specifically designed for the Nintendo Switch as a timed exclusive, so it's not even like you could say, oh, well maybe it's just a bad port or something like that. You had all the time in the world to spend with this game and develop this game. Like I said, it's been over 10 years since the original, so there was no need to try and rush something out to the marketplace for a game that, well, let's be honest here, is a niche game in the first place with a very, very small audience. If Deadly Premonition 2: A Blessing in Disguise taught me one thing, it's this: not every game in the world needs a sequel, and I honestly feel like Deadly Premonition is one of those games. So was Deadly Premonition 2: A Blessing in Disguise a disappointing experience for me? I mean, yeah, that's a bit of an understatement. It's just so bizarre to me that they took away so many of the things from the first game that made it so fun, like that sort of tense feeling when you're in combat and the great weapon variety, and just made everything very simplified. And the technical issues just absolutely make no sense to me. This isn't a game, like I said, that you need to rush out to the market. Nobody was really sitting there like, when's Deadly Premonition 2 coming out? Like, we would have accepted it whenever it came out. So to see all of these technical issues within the game that really hinder the gameplay experience just make it an unacceptable thing for me. I'm just so disappointed with this game. As a fan of the original game, this game probably should have never been made, and I guess patches could come along and sort of fix some of these issues, but as it stands now, it is a damn near unplayable experience, and more importantly, it's just not fun like the first game is. So let me know in the comments section down below if you plan on picking up Deadly Premonition 2, or if you're going to wait for maybe a sale or never play the game, because really I think that's not a bad option at this point in time. And as always, guys, thank you for checking out this video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, check out other videos on the channel as well, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.